I just want to mention a few things that the World Health Organization have been talking about. Now, the first one is related to Africa. Now, I haven't done a great deal of detailed research on this as of now, but I'm planning on doing this in the next day or so, because the cases in Africa are now, unfortunately, starting to increase. Now, Africa was looking fairly promising for quite a long period of time. It was remarkably low to get cases in the beginning, back in sort of January, February, March. And then key cases did seem to be quite low for a long period of time. South Africa had a very stringent lockdown, which was effective. But now, unfortunately, cases do seem to be increasing in South Africa and indeed throughout Africa as well. So more difficult times ahead in Africa. And as we've said before, we're not quite sure how this is going to interact with the other diseases that are already in Africa, such as tuberculosis and dengue fever and HIV, although some of the early indications aren't that good that there's going to be a kind of synergistic effect with other infectious diseases. As we know that there is this synergistic harmful effect with common comorbidities in Western countries, such as hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, and chronic lung diseases. So Africa, cases increasing by 24% in the past week. So this is basically a significant increase that we're starting to see in Africa now. South Africa certainly is fairly well documented, but other African countries as well, as flagged up by the World Health Organization and various news outlets. Now, origins of the outbreak, this long-running story. And I've got an interesting question at the end of this video that lots of people ask me about the virus coming from space, but we'll answer that properly and scientifically. But going back to this, origins of the outbreak. Now, initiation of the independent panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. So the World Health Organization have launched this new body, independent panel for pandemic preparedness and response, or indeed lack of preparedness might be a more appropriate description, to evaluate the world's response to COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully that will include the World Health Organization's often suboptimal response. Now, it's being headed up by a couple of fairly heavyweight politicians. Former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen, don't know much about her. I think she was a Labour politician in New Zealand, but if you're from New Zealand and I'm wrong, do correct me on that. And do let me know about her record. I don't know her in detail, but I know she's been doing some work with the United Nations, I think it is, lately. And I do know she's got an interest in health-related matters. And the former president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, incidentally the first female head of state in Africa. That's why I remembered her. So presumably these are people of high caliber, and let's hope they're independent and do a good job of this, because we need to assess pandemic preparedness or the lack of it. And there's a vital point here. In this current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had a virus which is quite transmissible, but not massively transmissible. It's not as transmissible as measles, for example, but it's quite transmissible. And it does make a lot of people sick and it does kill people. But the overall case fatality rate, mercifully, is relatively low. And actually that just means we've been lucky, because we could have had a virus which was as transmissible or more transmissible and more virulent that actually caused a much higher case fatality rate. So the next pandemic could be as transmissible as measles and as deadly as Ebola. It's by no means impossible. That could happen. So let's hope this is a bit of a wake-up call for the planet, and that we do have proper pandemic preparedness as we were supposed to have before the start of this, because this is quite an important topic. I'm not comparing this with the bubonic plagues of the past, but we did notice in 1348 between 40 to 50% of the population of England were killed by the Black Death. And we do know from outbreaks of smallpox, an example, in the Americas, that it killed hundreds of millions of people. Hundreds of millions died from smallpox after European colonisation. So let's hope they can come up with things that are hopefully helpful in the future, as well as learning lessons. Now, after a lot of reluctance, the Chinese have now invited in a World Health Organization team. So this is remarkably encouraging. And they are landing probably about now in China. So they are probably having a kip in their hotel rooms in China as we speak, after their flights. Now, I don't know much about it. It's an international team. I don't think the membership has been published. But it looks like it's an international team of fairly good medics and scientists. So some quite good boffins there that should hopefully get to the bottom of this. They're meeting up with their Chinese counterparts. And they are to identify the zoonotic source of the disease. What animal this disease came from as part of their investigation. And let's hope that lessons are learnt as regards interaction between Chinese and wild animals altogether, and that the food trade in wild animals is absolutely stopped. Why take that kind of risk when we don't need to take it? Apart from the humanitarian aspects as well, which are obvious, and the ecological aspects. You know, I've had quite a few people criticising bats because this virus came from bats. Not criticising bats, but saying, why don't we kill bats? See, bats are an integral part of the ecosystem. All organisms have to live on ecosystems. We all depend on each other in complex webs. And the history of ecology shows that if you start tinkering around with ecosystems, you get problems. So, for example, in all the birds are being eaten at the moment in Florida. So 20 years ago, there was all sorts of fantastic wild bird life in Florida. Now they're being eaten by the snakes. What are they? Burmese pythons. Burmese pythons were released into the wild in Florida, probably by accident or after a flood or something. And it just so happens that Burmese pythons get on really well in Everglade swamps. And they've increased in numbers greatly. If you go to shoot them, they just hide. So the numbers are just proliferating. And they seem to be eating a lot of the birds in Florida, which is tragic. This is what happens if you start messing around with ecosystems. So don't mess around with ecosystems. Developing. So this is still the brief of this World Health Organization team. Developing the scope and terms of reference for a World Health Organization-led international mission. So developing the terms of reference, in other words, working out what the heck they're going to do. So they're going to get on the ground and hopefully work out what this international mission is going to do. And let's hope the Chinese authorities are completely open to this investigation. Advance the understanding of animal hosts for COVID-19. And indeed, I would imagine for other viruses as well. Ascertain how the disease jumped between animals and humans, the so-called spillover infection. How did that happen? So, encouraging. Team of experts on the ground in China. Pleased to see that. Now, Chinese vaccine is being developed in. There's 20. I don't know if there's 20 different vaccine programs in China, but there's certainly 20 labs being supported by the government. But there's nothing in the offing for this year. It still looks like we're thinking about 2021 for any vaccines for COVID-19. Realistically, let's hope for earlier, but I'm not counting on it. Now, another thing the World Health Organization have flagged up is that COVID-19 is not the only pandemic. Of course, we've got human immunodeficiency virus. I remember looking after the first patients with this way back in the 80s, who were admitted. In those days, when the first patient I looked after, it was called HTLV2, or was it 3? HTLV2, I think, or 3. I can't remember. Anyway, it's now called HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, which of course causes the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And a lot of people, like 25 million people, are basically being kept alive by antiretroviral medication to suppress the viral numbers. And that's been greatly curtailed by the pandemic. So there's a risk that up to 25 million people aren't going to be getting their antiretroviral medication. And if people don't get their antiretroviral medication, of course, the AIDS will come back, and they can die from intercurrent infection, as they did before the highly active antiretroviral therapies were available. 73 countries are at risk of running out of stock of antiretrovirals. Now, this could cause a fair chunk of this 25 million people to get sick, and a fair chunk of them to die. So let's hope these supply lines are reinstigated. New HIV infections are stabilising at 1.7 million annually. Now, again, I was a little bit surprised about how high that number is. So there's 1.7 million new cases of HIV annually. So the HIV pandemic is not under control by any means. It's still there, and it still needs actively suppressed, because we still have no vaccine, remember, for HIV. The reason we hear less about it now is because it's being actively suppressed by antiretroviral drugs, which are now available fairly cheaply. They make huge amounts of very high quality antiretroviral drugs in India, for example. So let's hope those supply lines are maintained. Otherwise, it could be another one of these knock-on effects of the pandemic. Now, still talking about the virus. Now, I hesitated to ask this one, but I've been asked this question so many times. Do viruses come from space? Now, this started with a remarkably serious, high-caliber scientist in the UK called Fred Hoyle. And he believed in this panspermia idea, the idea that life can spread between planets. And he thought that viruses could come from space, and that these outbreaks of influenza A, for example, could be viruses from space. Now, Fred Hoyle was one of the most brilliant, unsung physicists of the 20th century. He worked out how the higher elements were fused together in stars via the process of nuclear fusion. Absolutely brilliant astronomer. Not such a good biologist, to be quite honest. Should have maybe stuck to his own field. So that's kind of where this has come from. Do viruses come from space? So let's give you the bottom line first. Let me think. No, of course not. Now, why am I saying that? Why am I so definitive? Well, in RNA, ribonucleic acid, which is the genetic material that makes up that codes for the COVID-19 virus, for example, there are 4 bases. These are organic bases. So there's adenine, cytosine, guanine, and uracil, ACGU. Those bases are the same, whether that RNA is in a virus, such as the COVID-19 virus, or any of the RNA viruses, or indeed if it's in the RNA in my cells. It's the same. So this aspect of life in the viruses is exactly the same as this aspect of life in me. The RNA in the virus is the same as the RNA in me. It's the same. It's the same. And of course, there's DNA viruses as well, just as we are coded for by DNA. And the bases there are adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, ATCG. So these are the bases in DNA. Now, what happens is actually the DNA. So let's take the COVID-19 virus for an example, the coronavirus. They vary. There's about 28 to 32,000 bases in a single strand of the RNA in this virus. So remember that's the viral RNA there. So there could be an A, C, a U, a G, an A, a U. The sequences of these letters. And what happens is three of these go together, and they code for the production of one amino acid. That puts one amino acid there, that puts the next amino acid there, and then these amino acids join together, then there's another amino acid there. And of course, a protein is a string of amino acids. So this is the code. It's the same for you, A, T, C, and G. In the human genome, for example, there's 3.1 billion of these letters in the human genome. And sequences of these A, T, C, and G in the case of our DNA code for a particular amino acid that make up our proteins. But the point is, this triplet code is the same in viruses, it's the same in bacteria, and it's the same in us. So this triplet code, and it's been worked out by biologists for a long time. When I did my first degree in biology, this was well understood back in the long time ago. These triplet codes were well understood. Which codes coded for which amino acids were well understood. And it's the same in all life. So this genetic code is the same whether you're a virus, a bacteria, a yeast on the mould of the top of the jam, if you're a mushroom, if you're a dog, if you're a carrot plant, it's all the same. And this is the strange thing about life on Earth. Well, not the strange thing, it's fairly obvious really, but all life on Earth is the same. It all works in the same way. It all works in exactly the same way. It's got these commonalities. It's the same. So there's this triplet code. And the viruses use the same 20 amino acids as in you and me. So there's the same 20 amino acids, and they're all what you call the L form. Now, amino acids are interesting things. They're not that complicated molecules, but they have shape. There's right-handed molecules and there's left-handed molecules. And if you synthesize amino acids, you get right and left-handed molecules. But of course, they can only fit together. They can only shake hands if they are both of the same one. So I can shake your right hand, but of course I can't shake my own hand. It doesn't fit because it's minor. In biochemistry, this is called chirality. They have different chirality. And the point is, all the amino acids in life on Earth are the L form. And it's the same in these viruses. So if they came from space, they could well be the R form. So basically, it's all exactly the same. All life is the same on Earth. So because it's all the same, the coincidence of that coming from space is improbable, because it's all the same. And then, of course, the infectious spikes on the surface of the COVID-19 virus, these infectious spikes that this virus has, it's these spikes on the virus that make it infectious. And these proteinaceous spikes fit into these receptor sites on the cell surface of our respiratory cells. So this is our cell here, way bigger than the virus, of course. And to say these fit is quite an understatement, really. To say these infective, this of course is the angiotensin 2, the ACE2 receptor. To say they fit is an understatement. There's a whole host of interactions goes on here. The fit is quite precise, and in fact there's what we call an induced fit, that there are chemical changes induced in the host protein to facilitate its absorption. It's quite complicated, we won't go into it, but it's a really good fit. So, the idea that your front door key fits someone else's front door just shouldn't happen. And this is a way better fit than that. So what we see is all life on Earth is the same. All life on Earth is believed to have common descent. And this is interesting because this is actually a field of biology called astrobiology. I took an interest in it about 18 months ago. So in astrobiology, you are applying biological principles to work out what alien life would look like. And of course, at the moment, there's no evidence of alien life whatsoever. But there is a place where it would be, there's a really good place where we could look for alien life. Because there's a planet that's just the right mass, with just the right amount of atmosphere, with just the right amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide and the right amount of water, and everything is just perfect for life, and of course that's Earth. But so far we've only found one type of life. So if life has originated twice on our planet, then there may be alien life amongst us. But if there is, we've never found it. Because all the life we've found so far is exactly the same. It all has the exact same chemical characteristics. All the cells use the same way to produce energy. They all have the same ADP, ATP energy mechanisms. It's all the same. But, way out, it's fascinating to think that in your garden there might be an alien form of life that uses a completely different genetic code or uses a completely different biochemistry or whatever. But if it does exist, no one's ever found it. And but then again, people haven't looked that hard. But anyway, I digress. So do viruses come from space? No.